Ancient and Modern Britions, Chapter 3. This chapter will discuss the following: the Silurian Piets and the Oestrymnic Isles, the British Iberians, the painted Moor and the word Moor, the Scottish Moors country, the colonization of north-central Scotland, the Moors of Heraldry, the traditions of the Color-Agnomens, Domnall Breac or Donald the Freckled, and the Speckled people, picked or freckled Scots. A distinguished writer on ethnology lays down certain propositions which he terms fixed points in British ethnology, that is, the study of the characteristics of various peoples and the differences and relationships between them. His first proposition is this: 1800 years ago, the population of Britain comprised peoples of two types of complexion, the one fair and the other dark. The dark people resembled the Aquitani and the Iberians. The fair people were like the Belgic Gauls. His second proposition is: the people termed Gauls and those called Germans by the Romans did not differ in any important physical character. These two propositions we may accept as well-founded. A splendid example of this fair race is the barbarian prisoner, supposed to Le Caractacus, portrayed from the marble in the British Museum, in the Dilettanti Society's publication of antique marbles and bronzes. If this be truly an ancient Britain, then the marble fully corroborates the united opinion of the ethnologist and the historian, and shows that the kind of man who is regarded by some as a regular Englishman, or clearly of Norman descent, was a native of Britain centuries before either of those two races entered, or at any rate ruled over it. For the noble manly features of this barbarian are exactly those attributed to the aristocrat of the popular fancy. That he himself was a real aristocrat there can be no doubt, whatever the name of his race, for his countenance is charged with dignity and force. And if such a face was rightly regarded at one time as that of a member of the ruling class, then it would appear that one of the several nations of pre-Norman and pre-English Britons had reasserted itself in the long run, though overborne for a time by Saxon and Norman and Dane. This style of man was not peculiar to the south of England, if tradition may be credited. Some, at any rate, of the Ossianic heroes were of the same kindred. The central figure, for instance, Fingal or Fionn, who is thus sketched:
marble his skin, the rose his cheek, blue was his eye, his hair like gold. And that he possessed the high chivalric qualities expressed in the features of the other is told by such lines as these: generous, just, despised a lie, of vigorous deeds, first in song, a righteous judge, firm his rule, polished his mien, who knew but victory, all men's trust, of noble mind, of ready deeds, to women mild, with miser's mind, from none withheld anything false, his lips ne'er spoke.
There is, of course, great uncertainty as to the lineage, era, and nationality of the second of these two figures, and legendary poetry is not so tangible as sculpture, but both men plainly belong to this Gaulish or German people, known ethnologically by the formidable title of Xanthocroi, and of the first it may be said, with some degree of certainty, that he and his nation inhabited some part of Britain 1800 years ago. But our islands contained other races at that period. When the war with the Silures, who occupied territories in the southwest, brought them, the Romans, in contact with that people, Tacitus records the result of their observation. Their complexion was different and of a darker hue. Their hair was curly, and they resembled the Iberians.
At an early period, the Greek writers, in whom we find the earliest notices of Britain, seem to have had a persuasion that the portion of the inhabitants of Britain who were more particularly connected with the working of tin possessed peculiarities which distinguished them from the rest. At first, they knew only of islands called the Cassiterites, so called from a word signifying tin, as the quarter from whence tin was brought. They then became aware that tin was wrought in Britain as well, and they came to view the Cassiterites as islands lying between Spain and Britain. Diodorus tells us that they who dwell near the promontory of Britain, which is called Belerion, Land's End, are singularly fond of strangers, and from their intercourse with foreign merchants, civilized in their habits. These people obtain the tin by skillfully working the soil which produces it. He also says, above the country of the Lusitanians, there are many mines of tin in the little islands called Cassiterides, from this circumstance, lying off Iberia in the ocean, and much of it also is carried across from the Britannic Isle to the opposite coast of Gaul, and thence conveyed on horses by the merchants through the intervening Celtic land to the people of Massilia and to the city called Narbonne. By the Cassiterites, the Scilly Islands seem to be intended.
Strabo reports of Posidonius that he says that tin is not found upon the surface, as authors commonly relate, but that it is dug up, and that it is produced both in places among the barbarians who dwell beyond the Lusitanians, and in the islands Cassiterites, and that from the Britannic Isles it is carried to Massilia. Massilia was an ancient Greek colony, or apoikia, on the Mediterranean coast, east of the France-Rhône river, and he adds, the Cassiterites are 10 in number, and lie near each other in the ocean towards the north from the haven of the Atabri. One of them is desert, but the others are inhabited by men in black cloaks, clad in tunics reaching to the feet, and girt about the breast, walking with staves and bearded like goats. They subsist by their cattle, leading for the most part a wandering life, and having metals of tin and lead, these and skins they barter with the merchants for earthenware and salt, and brazen vessels. Pomponius Mela and Pliny in the 1st century both allude to the Cassiterides, so called, say both, because they abound in tin, and so does Solinus in similar terms. But the latter also states that a stormy channel separates the coast which the Damnoni occupy from the island Silura, whose inhabitants preserve the ancient manners, reject money, barter merchandise, value what they require by exchange rather than by price, worship the gods, and both men and women profess a knowledge of the future. His description resembles that of Diodorus or Dionysius the African. However, I will refer to him as Dionysius Perigeta from now forward, and he probably considered Cornwall as an island, and connects it by name with the Silures. In the following century we find that the name of Cassiterides has been dropped, and they are now called Hesperides, while their inhabitants were believed to have been Iberians. Dionysius Perigeta says, in the end of this century, but near the sacred promontory, where they say is the end of Europe, the Hesperides Isles, whence tin proceeds, dwell the rich sons of the noble Iberians. In the 4th century, Rufus Festus Avienus calls these islands the Oestrymnides. He says that the northern promontory of Spain was called Oestrymnis, and adds, below the summit of this promontory the Oestrymnis Bay spreads out before the inhabitants, in which the Oestrymnis Isles show themselves,
lying far off and rich in metals of tin and lead. Great the strength of this nation, proud their mind, powerful their skill, trading the constant care of all, the broad boisterous channel with boats and southerly wind. They cut the gulf of the monster-filled ocean. They know not to fit with pine their keels, nor with fir. As use is, they shape their boats, but strange to say, they fit their vessels with united skins, and often traverse the deep in a hide.
Then, after mentioning the sacred island of the Hibernia and the island of the Albion, the earliest known name for the island of Britain, he adds, it is customary for the people of Tartessus to trade in the bounds of the Oestrymnes, and Priscianus Periagetta, who nourished in the beginning of the 6th century, calls them the Hesperides, and says that over against the sacred promontory, which men call the end of Europe, lie the Hesperides, full of tin which the strong people of the Iberia occupy. Dr. Skene, from whose chapter on the ethnology of Britain I have made this rather long extract, adds, at this place, "If these notices show that a persuasion existed among many that the population of the Scilly Isles, Cornwall and South Wales, was Iberian, an examination of the ancient sepulchral remains in Britain gives us reason to suppose that a people possessing their physical characteristics had once spread over the whole of both of the British Isles." And he cites archaeological evidence in proof of this. Although the exact position of the Cassiterites is not a matter of much moment, it may be remarked, in passing, that their identification with the Scilly Isles does not seem to be very clearly proved. Most of the writers just quoted appear to have regarded them, whether as Hesperides, Oestrymnes, or Cassiterites, as islands of considerable size in comparison with which the Scilly Isles form a mere handful of rocks, and their inhabitants are spoken of as an independent nation, though of Iberian blood, and also the locality is, in most of the instances, indicated as near to Spain rather than to England. Even in the loosest kind of description, one could scarcely include the Scilly Isles as lying in the Bay of Biscay, or bring oneself to imagine that they were visible or nearly so, to a man standing on the northern coast of Spain, which would be equivalent to seeing, in fact or in fancy, the Norwegian coast from the cliffs at Scarborough. The Cassiterites are above the country of the Lusitanians, or Portuguese, lying off Iberia, or Spain, towards the north from the haven of the Artabri, and their inhabitants are said to have worn black garments, like Lempriere's Lusitanians. Remembering that the adjective Britannic belongs to both sides of the Channel, and that both countries also have a tradition of a submerged Western territory, the Lyonnesque of Romance, which was covered so recently that the ancestors of some existing Cornish families are said to have come out of it, and that geological reasoning fully supports the legend, one has some excuse for supposing that the Cassiterites formed an archipelago stretching between the promontories of the Spanish and English coasts, of which the Scilly Isles were an insignificant fraction. But at any rate the people known as Iberians were spread all over the British islands, whether indigenous or immigrants, and some of their tribes were known as Domnall and Silures. This seems to be generally admitted. Physically they were swarthy or black in colour, had curly hair and were bearded like goats. They, or some clans of them, worshipped the gods, and both men and women professed a knowledge of the future. So then the Druids and Druidesses, who had colleges in an island near the coasts of Brittany, who professed a knowledge of the future, who, the men at least, were figured as bearded like goats, and who worshipped the gods were dark-skinned, curly-haired Iberians of the tribe of the Silures or Domnall perhaps. This seems a fair inference. The Druidesses of this island, or of one of these islands, are mentioned more than once, and eventually they suffered the fate of most of their order. The Isle of Sena, now Isle de Saintes, off the coast of France, contained a college of Druidesses, who, like him of Sker, had power over the winds which they were in the practice of selling to credulous mariners. These unfortunate damsels fell at last victims to the sanguinary system of persecution to which the votaries of bardism were everywhere subjected. Conan, Duke of Bretagne, in the fervour of his zeal, committed them to the flames. The same writer of those who acted so conspicuous a part, when in desperation they defended themselves against Gaius Suetonius Paulinus and his legions in Anglesey, and also states that, arrayed in black garments, they ran wildly to and fro with dishevelled hair and drawn swords, forcing back, like the cambric females of old, those who were retreating. Here again, the black dress is seen to be common to the Lusitanians, to the people of the Cassiterites, and to the Druidesses of Anglesey. And if, as may be reasonably supposed, all these belong to the same swarthy race, then, whatever position the Druids may have held among the rosy-cheeked, golden-haired Keltoi of the Greeks, to whom the barbarian prisoner and Oceanic Fingal were akin. They were at any rate quite unconnected by blood. The Iberians are styled swarthy and curly-haired. The word swarthy is rather elastic, for, although literally Schwartz, yet it is taken, I fancy, to mean something not quite so dark as the colour of a negro, in its usual acceptation. Perhaps this distinction does not exist, but at any rate, if the small dark Highlander and the black Celt to the west of the Shannon be assumed to be the descendants of Iberians, it may fairly be argued that, with so much intermixture with fairer races during the last 2,000 years, the stock must now be lighter-skinned than then, and its representatives of the 1st century must have been actually as black as Negroes. As a matter of fact, Pliny characterizes their complexion as Antiopium, that is, as black as an Ethiopian, and it may be that the curliness of their hair was of the same nature as a Negro's also. Thus, the Negritos of Huxley, the owners of such skulls as those found in Caithness, may have been allied to the ancient Iberians. That the wild tribes of Ireland were black men is hinted by the fact that a wild Irishman is in Gaelic, a black Irishman, Dub Iranach, and that some of the natives of Scotland as well as of England were of this race also is evident when one remembers that, according to Skinner, the powerful tribe of the Domnall, which was the chief of the confederacy of the Miseate, or marsh-dwellers, who were a part of the Picti or Caledon, were probably relations of their namesakes of southwestern Britain, which indeed is almost a certainty if nomenclature goes for anything. Therefore the British Picts resembled the Ugrian Picts and the Tasmanian and other kindred Picts, not only in the using of similar customs and weapons, but also in their most striking physical features. If the links of this chain of argument be held to be loosely joined together, or even disconnected, there can surely be little dubiety as to the evidence given by Claudian. There is a line of his which I have encountered in more than one antiquarian work, but by some strange oversight, one of its most significant words has, so far as I have seen, received no attention. In reciting the victories of the Roman general Theodosius, Claudian says,
Ille leves mauros, nec falso nomine pictos, edamuit.
Now, when Claudian wrote, and for a long time after, Maurus signified a great deal more than a native of Mauritania. Or it may be more correct to say that Mauritania implied as much, though in a different quarter, as Scythia did. Any Latin dictionary, any old one at least, will tell you that Maurus is a Moor, a blackamoor, or a tawny Moor, and Shakespeare uses the word Moor as a synonym for Negro. Merchant of Venice, Act 3. Scene, fool. As that last word bears nowadays a somewhat restricted meaning, it may be better to take the old-fashioned blackamoor as the nearest English rendering of Maurus, signifying thereby any black or brown-skinned man. This usage of Moor, blackamoor, and tawny Moor outlasted Shakespeare by at least 2 generations. In a brief narrative of the encounters between the early colonists of New England and the native Indians, I find it stated that these unfortunate gentlemen were intercepted by 700 Moors, with whom they fought for the space of 4 hours, till not only they two, but Captor Sharp and 51 Christians more, lay dead upon the place. And again that at Woodcocks, 10 miles from Seconch, on the 16th May, was a little scrimmage betwixt the Moors and Christians, wherein there was of the later 3 slain and 2 wounded, and only 2 Indians killed, taken from News from New England. London, 1676, reprinted at Boston and Albany, United States, 1850, and republished in 1865. Consequently, the translation of Claudian's line of a dark to brown-skinned man is this:
He subdued the nimble blackamoors, not wrongly named, the painted people.
The British Picts, like those of other lands, stand out again as dark-skinned men. A complementary witness with Maurus is Gorm, found attached to the names of Highland and other chiefs and kings. This word is given in the Gaelic dictionaries as signifying blue of whatever shade, also green as grass. and this recalls the fact that the indigenous tribes described by Caesar were styled both virides, green, and carule, blue, from the woad yellow, with which they stained their bodies, the colour of which may come under either of these headings. Accordingly, when one looks again into the Gaelic dictionary, one finds that gonan is woad. Plainly, therefore, a man who is titled Gorm is a woad-stained man. Now, although in the Gaelic of Scotland a Negro is known as Dwyn Dwb, a black man, he is known in the Gaelic of Ireland as Dwyn Gorm, a blue, green, or woad-stained man. And while in the Scottish Highlands, the adjective Gaelas is used to signify both swarthy and green, in Wales it has the meaning of green or blue, and in the latter country the Gaelic Gorm, here spelled GWRM, is equivalent to brown. What possible explanation for all this apparent confusion of terms can there be, except the patent one that a brown-skinned man and a woad-coloured man were one and the same? I compare this, the obsolete and archaic expressions green man, or a savage. The author James Orchard Halliwell defines green man in his 6th edition. A dictionary of archaic and provincial word, obsolete phrases, proverbs, and ancient customs, from the century 4th–10th century. Morus is a word which suggests a great deal. It has this in common with the Ugrian word cara or tiar, previously glanced at, that it not only signifies swarthiness of skin, but it is radically connected with a marsh or morass, or cars as it is called in Scotland. One meaning of morus, in Latin, is palus, and the words marsh, morass, marish, merse, in Saxon, and moor or muir are all different forms, clearly of one original root, whatever that may be. The Appian land certainly meant the wheatery land, mer umschlungen, among the pre-Hellenic Greeks, just as the same land is called Moria by the modern post-Hellenic or Romaic Greeks from Moor, the name for the sea in the Slavonic vernacular of its inhabitants during the heart of the Middle Ages. So says Lord Strangford, speaking authoritatively. In Gaelic, the sea is Mara and Muir, which suggests the Latin mare. Armstrong, who certainly excels in ferreting out an enormous number of kindred words, in this as in other cases, though sometimes with questionable success, gives a list of other forms, selected from nearly every European and one or two African and Asiatic tongues. And of carse or curse which is denned as low and fertile land, generally that which is adjacent to a river, Dr. Jameson states that in one instance, at least, it means something very like a marsh. He quotes a historical passage relative to the movements of the English army at Bannockburn, which shows that the Carse of Falkirk was then impassable for cavalry. This district, it may be remembered, formed a part of the territory of the Piets or marsh folk, 1,000 years before the Battle of Bannockburn. Dr. Jameson remarks upon this. This connection would almost indicate some affinity between our Carse and Carbicors, Palus, which is a marsh. Sugercair and Isilcair, Earcair, both signify a marsh. The Anglo-Saxon Circe or Kursk, i.e. cress, and also perhaps Gars, grass, in Scotland Gursk, may be traced from this word, and it might fairly be argued that Carsland was simply cress, or grass land, and had no connection with Cara, black, which argument, however, hinges entirely upon the age of the word cress or circe. In the absence of evidence proving it to be older than, and unconnected with Cara, I prefer to regard it as an outcome of the time when the meadows and marshes were known as the Cars land, just as they were also known as the J. Ewer lands or Menhirs, the marshes, morasses, the Mers in Berwickshire, and the Maggers in Galloway, from the race who dwelt among them, styled Cara or Tiar and Morus. But one cannot fail to see that as the terra firma of the modern moor and Carsi has succeeded the watery morass and cause, so also the morass which, as Pythias said, was neither land nor sea, has succeeded mere, moor or muir, etc., the ocean itself. Therefore, if the word moor and its variations was primarily the sea, and gave its name to a nation of sea rovers, or if the case were reversed and the sea became associated with the name of a great seafaring race, then a wider vista opens out before us. There has been much written about Mere Minnen and other water people. For an example, in the Contemporary Review written in 1881, in a series of essays by Carl Blind. The subject is usually treated mythologically, although capable, I venture to think, of being interpreted realistically. This view of the origin of Moorus must, however, be disregarded here, and our attention turned more directly to the dwellers among the moors and marshes. Whether they gave their name to these places, or were so styled because they inhabited them, they were at any rate known as Moors. That is to say, this became the general pronunciation given to the word. The original root seems likelier to have been Moor, as seen in Cornish, Armorican and other languages. Jameson, in his Scottish dictionary, says of the word Moriav, the east river of modern-day Czech Republic, defined by him as black, swarthy, resembling a moor. This word has certainly been used in Old English, as Cotgrave gives it the same sense of the France word mere. It is probably a contraction of the Latin Mauritania or a moor. It would perhaps be more correct to say that Mauritanus and Maurus are extensions of Moor. He also connects this word with the morion that formed the headpiece of the medieval man-at-arms. Another English word from this root is murrey, meaning dark red or copper colour. The country of Moravia is said to receive its name from its chief river, the Morava, March, or anciently Marus, and its first known inhabitants are stated to have been a people named Quadi, who emigrated in the 5th century to Gaul and Hispania. The river Morava is tautology, for Morava is Moor river, whether Ava be regarded as Celtic or Gothic or a language older than either. It is not unreasonable to conjecture that the Quadi who went into France and Spain may have borne this name Moor, the other having been given to them by outsiders or vice versa. They seem to have been known to the Romans, against whom they fought by the first of these names. Lempriere gives several nations bearing names beginning with Moor, the Moray or Morienses in India, and the Moruni in that country also, and the Morini, a people of Belgic Gaul on the shores of the British Ocean, are examples. The Mori of Mauritania are perhaps the most notable examples of a nation bearing this name, though in a slightly altered shape. I see that Lempriere states their name to have been derived, according to some authors, from their black complexion. This raises the question again as to what is the origin and primary meaning of the word. The consideration of this word, and of the localization of races thus named, is not irrelevant at this point. For although it may not be easy to trace their route hither, and the date of their arrival, a branch of this family did inhabit Britain, and are not only known as Mori and Moors, but also as Moravienses, Morienses, identical with the name of those in India, Murray men, and people of Moray, or Moravia. This name Moraina was given to 2 districts in Scotland, one, the most important, in the north-central, and the other in the southern portion of the country. That the Piets, known to the Romans as Mori, were finally divided into 2 sections inhabiting these localities, is a speaking fact which it is well to remember at this juncture. The smaller district in the south has been the name-father of a family distinguished in Scottish history, the Murrays of Philiphaugh in Selkirkshire, whose ancestor Archibald de Moravia was among those who subscribed the oath of fealty to Edward I of England in 1296. One of the estates of this clan bore the significant name of the Black Baroni. Of course, the race of Archibald de Moravia may have been that of an intruding army, and not necessarily that of the Moravienses, as he was simply Archibald, Lord of Moravia. Sir Charles of Murray, who fought at Chevy Chase, of the same clan, shows the name in its modern form or approximately. But the principal territory of the Moravienses was, according to Mr. Skene, a large district of which Loch Ness was about the centre, the name of which he spells Moravia or Moray.
It is likely enough that this South Country family received their name in the same way as the Murrays of Tullibardine, whose ancestor, Fresqueen, is conjectured by Sir Robert Douglas, quoted by Burke, to have acquired from David I. Some of the most fertile districts in the lowlands of Moray as a reward for his exertions in helping to quell an insurrection of the Moraymen in 1130. This Lord de Moravia was of a different race from the people he fought against, being described as a Flemish settler.
These northern Morienses were a wild and turbulent race, and some septs of them are remembered as the Moray rebels, having been apparently in almost constant rebellion during the 10th, 11th and 12th centuries, although others of them proved loyal to the Celtic kings. They appear to have been finally subdued by Malcolm IV in the year 1160. Before that time they were, as I have said, in a chronic state of rebellion. Malcolm MacDonald, more correctly Maelcolam, son of Domnall, king of Alban, was killed by them in the year 954 while endeavouring to quell them, then in revolt. The learned historian of Celtic Scotland says, "The Pictish Chronicle tells us that the men of Moern slew him at Fodresach, now Fetteresso, in the parish of Fordun, Kincardineshire. But the later chronicles remove the scene of his death farther north, and state that he was slain at Ulurn by the Moravienses, or people of Moray. St. Berchan, however, places it with the Pictish Chronicle in the parish of Fordun, when he says,
9 years to his reign, traversing the borders. On the brink of Dunfother, at last, will shout the gale around his grave."
From this apparent confusion between the men of Moern and the Moravienses, it may be conjectured that they were one and the same people. The two names given to the scene of Malcolm's death may also refer to the same place. In 1130, there was a great rising of the Morienses under their Mormaer, or Earl, Angus, who entered Scotia, at that period only the eastern portion of central and southern Scotland, with 5,000 men, with the intention of reducing the whole kingdom to subjection. The King of Scotia was then David I, son of Malcolm Cianmore and Margaret, sister of Edgar II. He was also Earl of Northamptonshire, and had them both together, the kingdom of Scotland and the earldom in England being, says Mr. Skene, the first feudal monarch of Scotland. Upon this Edward, the son of Siward, Earl of Mercia, in the time of King Edward, who was a cousin of King David and commander of his army, assembled troops and suddenly threw himself in the enemy's way. A battle was at length fought, in which Earl Angus was slain and his troops defeated, taken prisoners or put to flight, vigorously pursuing the fugitives with his soldiers elated with victory, and entering Morafia, or Moray, now deprived of its lord and protector, he obtained, by God's help, possession of the whole of that large territory. This engagement is thus recorded in the Ulster Annals, battle between the men of Alban and the men of Moray, in which fell 4,000 of the men of Moray, with their king Unas, son of the daughter of Lulag, 1,000 also of the men of Alban, in heat of battle. This was quoted in Celtic Scotland, Volume 1, page 462, from which also, page 457-461, the preceding sentences have been taken. Mr. Skene adds that in a eulogium of the day King David is styled that invincible king who had subdued unto himself so many barbarous nations and had without great trouble triumphed over the men of Moray and the islands. And at the same period the natives of the Isle of Man, then under Norwegian rule, are spoken of as the barbarous natives. I mention this to show how the one race looked upon the other, or the others. Some of the conquered Moraymen seem to have fought under King David's banner as Muravenses a few years after this, but there were others of them still unsubdued in spirit. As previously stated, they rose against Malcolm V in the year 1160. This young king, though only 20 years of age, had during that year thrice invaded Galloway, finally conquering its inhabitants, who were Picts, and also the mixed race known as Galgaidel. He then turned his arms against the people of the north, and invaded their country of Moravia. Indeed, it would scarcely appear that in this instance they could be termed rebels, for it was more an act of aggression on the part of the king, with the aim of crushing all resistance out of them, which he succeeded in doing. He then, to prevent any future trouble, removed them all from the land of their birth, and scattered them throughout the other districts of Scotland, both beyond the hills and on this side thereof, so that not even a native of that land abode there, and he installed there in his own peaceful people. From this date, therefore, the Scottish Moravia became the home of another race than that which bestowed its name upon it, as the Austrian Moravia had done many centuries before. But it remained a debatable land for a long time after its evacuation by the Moray men. Whether there still remained an infusion of the native blood among the people of the lower ranks, or whether King Malcolm's own peaceful people, we were not very peaceful after all, the inhabitants of this province seem to have been regarded as Ishmaelites long after 1160. In Pennant's tour in Scotland this fact crops out. He speaks of a letter from Sir Ewan Cameron to a chief in the neighbourhood of the county of Murray, wherein he regrets the mischief that had happened between their people, many having been killed on both sides, as his clan had no intention of falling on the Grants when it left Lochaber, but only to make an incursion into Murray land, where every man was free to take his prey. This strange notion, adds Pennant, seems to have arisen from the country, having been for so many ages a Pictish country, and after that under the dominion of the Danes, and during both periods in a state of perpetual warfare with the Scots and Western Highlanders. It has been seen that one of the modern forms of this word is Moray, or Murray. It is surely more than a coincidence that among an antipodan family of Australioids, those of Queensland, a blackfellow is a Murray. Journal of the Anthropological Institute, Volume 3, Number 2, page 202-4. Another form is Morris, existing now as a surname, and remembered as associated with the Morris dance, common enough in this country during the Middle Ages, and still practised, I believe, by English country folk. Its origin is ascribed to the Moors, though the genuine Moorish dance, the fandango of the present day, bears little resemblance to it. The chief performer was the hobby horse, so called from the light frame of wickerwork, which was fastened round his body, and supplied with a pasteboard head and neck, so as to give him the appearance of a man on horseback. Bells were also attached to his ankles, and the great art consisted in so moving the feet as to produce a rude kind of concord. The other principal actors, after a rude fashion, personified the characters of Maid Marian, the Queen of the May, Robin Hood, Friar Tuck, the Fool, etc., and the performance was accompanied by rude music and the clashing of swords and staves, and was the chief amusement at parochial festivals. This is found in the original publication of Chambers' Encyclopedia via 1860. In its original form it appears also to have been danced with wild leaps and bounds, more in keeping with the orgies round the earliest maypoles than with the innocent revels of modern English rustics. This dance, then, which bears little resemblance to that of the mixed nation now called Moors, is one of the ancient dances of this country. Sir Walter Scott has this to say regarding it: "Considerable diversity of opinion exists respecting the introduction of the Morris dance into Britain. The name points it out as of Moorish origin, and so popular has this leaping kind of dancing for many centuries been in this country, that when Handel was asked to point out the peculiar taste in dancing and music of the several nations of Europe, to the French he ascribed the minuet, to the Spaniard the saraband, to the Italian the arietta, to the English the hornpipe, or Morris dance. This is found in Fair Maid of Perth, note S, so that it was actually regarded as the national dance of our country. England has never been invaded from Morocco during historic times, nor even is this dance the property of the people of Morocco. It is peculiarly British, and yet of Moorish origin. Yes, but the date of its introduction into Britain by the Moors was the date of the landing of the Pictish people, whomsoever that may have been. Crests had won their spurs in assisting the Spaniards to expel their Moors. The bearing is too common among ancient coats to admit of this explanation, and the heraldic representation of a Moor or Negro man does not suggest Granada. The features are ugly and irregular, and the hair, though longer than that of a pure Negro, is woolly. The head is encircled by a fillet or chaplet, and there are pearls pendant from the ears. The complexion is, of course, black. Such men are indifferently styled Moors and Saracens. Their presence in the armorial bearings of ancient families can only be due to the cause which made savages, wild men, haughty woodmen so common among the supporters of old North European and especially Scottish shields, the exploits of the founder of the family in the long conflicts with the people of heathenness. There is yet another form in which this name of Moor has reached us, and it is found in Galloway, a province in which the Picts remained until almost recent times, being known as Picts, and speaking their language so lately as the reign of Queen Mary. In this district the word is Morrow, and there is a tradition of the presence of one of this race living in some part of Galloway at an uncertain period, which has been preserved by MacTaggart in his Gallovidian Encyclopedia. This straggling specimen, probably one of the last of unmixed blood, does not impress us favourably, and if the others of his race possessed of similar characteristics, it is easy to see why they were remorselessly hunted down. He is locally remembered as the Black Morrow, which of course is Black Moor, Moray, or Murray. Tradition has him a Blackymore, says the yeoman chronicler, and says he haunted the forests south of Kirkcudbright. There he stopped during the day, riding out on the neighbouring country at night and committing horrible outrages. Also, that having found his retreat, which was beside a cool spring in the dark forest, yet called the Blackymore's Wall, that is, Welt, a barrel of spirits was brought by the people and poured into the spring well one night when he was out on his rambles. Next day, having drank of the fountain as usual, he became touched with the grog and fell asleep, snoring profoundly. His foes then rushed on him, like the Philistines on Samson, and dirked his heart with many a deadly hole. Such is the story told in the beginning of this century by a Galloway farmer, and likely enough to be true in all its details, even to the grogging of the well. He does not say anything as to the date of the incident, but as he states that it has baffled the antiquaries, it is probably many centuries old. In Gaelic, Black Morrow becomes Mordub. This is the shape in which the name appears in the quaint letter of John Elder, the Redshank priest, to King Henry VIII, often quoted by Scottish antiquaries, and printed at length in the Collectanea de Rebus Urbanicis. He brings it in the following passage. Now, and please your excellent majesties, the said people which inhabited Scotland afore the incoming of the said Albanactus, as I have said, being valiant, strong, and courageous, although they were savage and wild, had strange names, as Morhow Mordicus, etc. Mr. Skene spells it Mordhow, but either spelling will stand for Douve, which, in certain conjunctions and in different accents, is pronounced do, who, the wow of elder, and you. The Black Warriors or Black Watch of the West Highland Tales, Mordouv, is plainly another of this race. The source of the regiment's name is uncertain. In 1725, following the Jacobite rebellion of 1715, General George Wade was authorised by George I to form 6 watch companies to patrol the Highlands of Scotland, 3 from Clan Campbell, 1 from Clan Fraser of Lovat, 1 from Clan Munro and 1 from Clan Grant. These were to be employed in disarming the Highlanders, preventing depredations, bringing criminals to justice, and hindering rebels and attainted persons from inhabiting that part of the kingdom. Francis Handes Groom states in his Ordnance Gazetteer of Scotland 1901 that the watch was embodied in a field in Aberfeldy in 1739. The force was known in Gaelic as Am Freisiadan Dub, the Dark or Black Watch. The Jacobite prison logs are further proof of my state. Let us turn our eye to Word Murwow. Today one is more likely to hear the last name Murdoch. It is probable that in cases where the surname Murray was never written with the qualifying de before it, an actual descent from Murray men or Moors is possessed by the bearer of it. The names Maury, Murray, Muir, Moir, and Morrison have clearly arisen from a connection with the Moor, but not necessarily one of kinship. Several families so named carry 3 Moors' heads in their armorial bearings, as having some allusion to their name. It seems likely that these forms are variations of the Gaelic genitive of Moor, and really signify de Moravia. Obviously, the heads would be borne by conquerors, not descendants of Moors. It is also stated in Anderson's Y Scottish Nation, whence the foregoing extract is taken, that the name Moor is derived from the Gaelic mar, big or large. In all modem instances this must certainly be the case, but at the first it must have been derived from the Ator people. That the adjective itself also came from that source is a theory quite defensible, as I shall endeavour to show in another place. Anderson further says, in a note to a history of one of these families, the editor, William Muir, says, "The surname Moor certainly occurs very early in all the 3 British kingdoms, and is most probable of Celtic origin. Such names as Morton, Morham, Morbattle may have come from this word when it meant a people and not moorland. So also Morville in Picardy. Picardy itself suggests the Picardach, Pictzel, as Ho is the old name for Poitiers, Pictavium. Scottish history, using the word Scottish in its widest sense, is full of suggestions of conflicts and eventually offalliances between black, brown and white races. Mr. Skene includes the terms Ban and Gin, white, Chiar and Du, black, Diog and Ruard, red, Hath, grey, Glass, green, also grey, Gorm, blue, Break or Brit, speckled, among the names of the primary colours which enter into the composition both of names, persons and places. To these may be added Don Brown, which word is indeed no other than dun and tawny, and also boithe, yellow. Now, of these terms, it has been shown that green and blue, so often interchangeable with black and brown, relate to the woad-stained, dark-skinned races. Breac, translated spotted or speckled, will be glanced at presently, but of the remainder 2 are of uncertain meaning. These are Ruad and Budi, usually rendered red and yellow, and usually also held to denote the colour of the hair. But where the hair is not specified, as it is in Haarfagr, it is a little unwarrantable to assume that the adjective does not refer to the complexion. It is obviously absurd to suppose that the distinguishing agnomens, percent-reen, blue and speckled, have to do with the hair. Why, then, should the other? As a matter of fact, I find that one who knows Gaelic intimately, both as a spoken and as a written language, translates Ruad as tawny in at least one instance. This can be found in Campbell's West Highland Tales, Volume 2, page 202. That it is now generally held to signify russet or red-haired seems without doubt. But when it was used to distinguish the red Comyn from the black Comyn, and the red Douglas from the black Douglas, the black in each case having reference to complexion, it seems quite likely that the red branches of those families were Ruath or tawny, being by admixture of white blood less swarthy than their black kindred. So also with Benida, yellow. When one finds that in a Gaelic poem of the 11th century the phrase Macdoncha datha drech bui is translated son of Duncan of the yellow countenance, and that the same king is also styled Macdoncha drech ruir, the son of Duncan of the ruddy countenance, it is evident that a yellow or copper-coloured face is intended, and that in this instance Bidi and Ruad are interchangeable terms for tawny. More can be found in Collectanea de Reims Albanicis, page 76 through 70. The same expression occurs in the prophecy of Saint Berchan, J, though with reference to another king, about whose individuality there is some confusion. But as he too was Dreshbuide, or yellow-faced, and as his successor in the throne of Alban is stated to have laid waste the country of the Gaidhela Gaala, or of Fergail, it seems likely that these 2 kings represented a race inimical to the whites, a race of yellow-faced Mongoloids. Of the same race, too, was Malcolm, son of Donald, who reigned over Alban in the middle of the 10th century. For he is described as the Bodbediag, the dangerous red man in the prophecy of Saint Berchon. and in none of the cases cited is there any reference intended to red or yellow hair by the use of the terms ruad and buide. For the sake of clarification, I shall define agnomen, agnomen. A fourth name given as an honour to an ancient Roman citizen. Such practices have been carried on through the Annuals of Time, Merriam-Webster. Such color-agnomens as these are very common in early history, and they point clearly to an era when greatly differing races were encountering each other, now struggling for the mastery, and now peacefully intermarrying. For example, we see one of the black people, the Moors of the Romans, in the person of a king of Alban of the 10th century. History knows him sometimes as Kenneth, sometimes as Dubh, and sometimes as Nigger. The version of the Pictish Chronicle in the Irish Nennius calls him Tinad Vel Dubh, and San Berchon styles him Dubh of the Three Black Divisions. The Picts seem to have preserved a tradition that the whole nation was once divided into 7 provinces, and it would appear that the 3 black divisions over which Dubh, or the Black, held sway, formed that portion of the original 7 which still remained untouched by the white races, in short, the Pictish provinces. He seems to have been constantly at war with Quilian or Caniculus, the young dog, who is called Fionn, or White, by Saint Berchon, and eventually White succeeded in driving Black out of the country, and reigning in his stead for more than 20 years after. A son, however, of the dispossessed Kenneth, or Dubh, known too as Kenneth MacDubh, regained the kingship in the year 927, reigning until the year 1004. He is termed the Don or Brown from Strong Duncan, and since Don implies a lighter shade than Dubh, being in fact dun or tawny, it is probable that Kenneth, son of the Black, was of white blood on the mother's side. A somewhat different race mixture is perhaps indicated in the case of Conad Sear, Black Kenneth, whose father, a Pictish king, bore the name of Eochad Buidhe, or Yellow Hector. Another son of this king was Domnall Barcac, this Domnall Donald. Breac is said to have succeeded his brother, Swarthy Kenneth, as king of the Dalriads in the year 629, and, according to the Annals of Ulster, he was killed at the Battle of Carron near Falkirk in the 642. And the introduction of his name brings us now to the consideration of the epithet Breac. For the sake of brevity, I shall tell you to research Celtic Scotland Volume 1. Pages 231, 242, 366 and 382 for the facts stated in this paragraph. It is generally rendered spotted or speckled, and in its aspirated form, Breac, pronounced Vrec, it offers itself very reasonably as the father of the modern freckle. Many words have been formed from it in Gaelic, and when it is now applied to a man it has the significance of pimply or marked with the smallpox. But its original meaning seems to be checkered, spotted, carved, embroidered, and out of one of these meanings has come the word breacair, a graving tool, an engraver. Now, when one bears this in mind and remembers that the nickname Breac was applied to a 7th century Pict by, presumably, a non-Pictish people, does it not almost amount to a certainty that the word was used in its sense of engraved or checkered, that it bore reference to the tan-punctured bodies of the Picts, and that, in short, Domnall Breac is nothing else than tattooed Donald? The term Breac, says Mr. Skene, is usually associated with those of Pictish race. The scene of Donald's death is closely identified with his people, but it is only here appropriate to make reference to one name in that locality, Falkirk. The first syllable, fal, far, or far, is held to be Anglo-Saxon, and to signify speckled, spotted, of many colours, and the word Falkirk is generally translated the speckled church. The Gaelic name for the same place is Eglais Breac, and the meaning is, of course, the same. It is possible that a church or temple once stood there, of which the distinguishing feature was some peculiarity of carving or of colouring. But, situated as it was in a district peculiarly Pictish, it is more than likely that it received its name, not from any outward characteristic belonging to it, but because it was the temple of the tattooed people. This epithet Breac occurs so frequently in the topography of Scotland, and in such varying conjunctions, attached as it is to islands, lochs, mountains, and, in this instance, to a church, that its meaning cannot be reasonably solved by the supposition that the church, loch, mountain, or island presented in itself a speckled appearance. There are, for example, two little mountain lochans on either side of Loch Awe, known as the Lochans nam Breac Buide, or the Lochans Breac Buide, that is, the lochans of the speckled yellow people. Now it may seem at first to be destructive of what has been said above, to state that the people here indicated are not human beings at all, but simply the little finny folk that abound in such lochans. In reality, however, this supports the above theory, for the name does not refer to the water of the loch, but to its inhabitants. Whether in these and similar instances the name was originally given on account of the trout may be doubted, however, for one of these lochs is on a spur of Breac, the Speckled Mountain, and the district in which both are situated abounds in suggestive names. Let this be compared with the name of the loch upon Cumro, the Red Mountain, in the south of Ireland. This name is more explicit. It is the Lake of the Red Women. So that if, on the Red Mountain, the loch is named after the Red people, is it not likely that the loch on the Speckled Mountain is, or was originally named after the speckled people who inhabited the district? Again, however anxious one might be to discover an animal or a bird that by its appearance might reasonably have caused the qualifying adjective speckled to be attached to the district which it inhabited, it is difficult to find any except the human animal that will suit. Bain Breac, Lochan Breac, Casebrec, Inchbrec, Eiglas Breac. All of these, when taken collectively, cannot reasonably be derived from any other source than from the people who dwelt among them. Thus, although it is right to remember that, in the case of certain lochs, the yellow-speckled folk are not men but fish, it by no means follows that those lochs were originally named after the fish. Nothing is commoner than for a peasantry to invent an explanation of this or that local name, when its origin is lost in the darkness of a great antiquity. But the theory that this class of epithets has derived its existence from the fact that Breac or tattooed people once dwelt in those places in which such names most abound, offers the simplest and most natural explanation of their meaning. And that this is really the right explanation will, I hope, be made clearer after a few chapters.